The WAFB Podcast Network is sponsored by Neighbors Federal Credit Union.
Hey, good morning, Jacques. How are you?
I'm doing outstanding. I'm talking to Garth Brooks.
Entering his second year as the LSU head football coach.
It was the only way I could get a foot in the door.
Joined by the icon, Kim Mulkey. Hey, Coach, great to see you.
Jacques Talk is sponsored by Cork's Cajun Fried Fish and Shrimp and Couillon's Cajun Barbecue.
Thanks for joining us again, and our guest today is without a doubt one of the best Louisiana broadcasters. You hear him on 104.5 ESPN every day from 11 to 1. You hear him on the LSU football pregame show, the postgame show. Charles Hanagriff. Charles, thanks for coming down and being with us today.
Well, Jacques, it's great to be here. Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, and huge Jimmy Buffett fan as well. Both of us lost our musical heroes in the last few years. The other day was the 4-year anniversary of Eddie Van Halen's death, and Jimmy Buffett, he passed beginning of last year, right?
Last fall. It was a Saturday we found out that we were doing the pregame show, and Chris Blair, who's the voice of the Tigers, is a huge Jimmy Buffett fan too. The first time Chris and I met, we talked for about 5 minutes about football and about an hour about Buffett shows that we had been to.
Yeah, well, maybe you didn't think you'd start the show this way, but Jimmy Buffett, it's interesting. I look at his career and all of his hits, like the songs that you really know, except for It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere, which he did much later in his career. He sang a verse or two on that. But all of his hits were kind of like late 70s into early 80s, yet his career and a live act being a draw just continued over the years. It's interesting. He created that lifestyle thing that people wanted to go see.
Cult following, but so much more than a cult following. The music was just part of the overall. I said this when he passed. Music, when it's done right, sparks some kind of emotion, and the emotion that Buffett's music was joy. It was just joy, and that's what I like. It was kind of similar to I wasn't a Grateful Dead fan. I mean, I did listen to some of this stuff, but Bill Walton followed him so much, and it was a great comparison between the Parrot Heads and the Deadheads. Yeah. These cult followings of these musical acts. Yeah,
just a guy who created, hey, stop worrying, stop stressing out about this and that. When you can have a hit with a song called Cheeseburger in Paradise, I mean, you've got a magic touch, right?
Yeah, and the thing was, he worked so hard, worked real hard to promote a lifestyle of not working hard.
Well, one memory I have of him tied to sports was the 2009 NFC Championship game in the Superdome. The Saints are playing the Vikings. And I think Bobby Hebert was upset because he didn't have his normal seats. They had moved him back. And I see kind of this older gentleman come in, and I see kind of this skinny, younger guy come in, and it was none other than Jimmy Buffett and Kenny Chesney sitting on the front row. And I think they left before Hartley even made the field goal to send the Saints to the Super Bowl. But
so much of his career was centered around New Orleans and in being in Mississippi, which the Saints are. If you live in Mississippi, your pro team is probably the Saints. So he had a strong connection to the team, and I believe he was pretty good friends with Sean Payton.
Yeah, they were buddies, and I think he did the national anthem. I want to say before that dreadful day against the Rams, the NFC Championship game. The NOLA no call when the Saints got jobbed that day. I think he did the national anthem, if I'm not mistaken. So, special time of year right now in Baton Rouge. It's too bad we can't be doing this show outside because I don't think there's a drop of rain on the forecast for the next 10 days. The cool breeze blowing, a lot different than the beginning of August when it's just dreadful outside and you're out there covering LSU practicing or whatnot. This is the time of year that you look forward to, that you kind of work towards, and meaningful games. LSU is going into October now with 4 games on the slate that's either going to send them towards a playoff berth or derail the year.
Yeah, when you get a game like this, Tiger Stadium, when it's at its best, okay, but you got to have all of the factors now. It's not the 1980s anymore. Every game's on TV, and the weather's got to be right, and the opponent's got to be right. But when it is, it's still a real special place. And I think that this weekend, you've got the right opponent. You've got enough importance to this game to to qualify. The weather's going to cooperate, and then it's the 100-year anniversary of Tiger Stadium. There's going to be some special stuff going on this weekend. I think you've got every element in place here for this to be a real special game.
Yeah. The game kind of lost a little luster when Ole Miss lost to Kentucky. You know, in my opinion, you always want the other team to come in as highly ranked as possible and undefeated if possible. If you can beat them, it makes your win look better. But certainly Ole Miss, after being upset at home by Kentucky, they bounce back in a big way. They go to South Carolina and really smother the Gamecocks 27-3. And as Brian Kelly talked about it in his press conference, the difference between Ole Miss last year to this year, they're playing much better defense. Now, I realize they haven't played a gauntlet of a schedule, but just looking at their defensive numbers, they're only giving up 7.5 points per game. They're only giving up 63 yards rushing a game and 203 yards passing. So LSU scored 49 on these guys a year ago in Oxford. That's going to be much more difficult this time around.
Yeah, Brian Kelly doesn't want that kind of game anyway. He said that in his press conference this week. He wants to play complementary football. I have no doubt that LSU will be able to move the football and score. I'm much more concerned about Lane Kiffin's ability to exploit mismatches in the secondary. You know, LSU's played a lot of guys back there. Kelly talked about shortening his rotations. I think they've gotten the pass rush has gotten better as the season's going along. But, you know, Kiffin creates mismatches as well as anybody in the game, and especially the plays that he scripts at the beginning. And you've seen these wide shots to the sideline when he knows he's got you, and before the quarterback even throws the ball, he throws his hands up in the air because he knows he's got a touchdown. Those are the plays that would scare me the most as an LSU fan. Those ones where he takes advantage of a miscommunication or a mismatch somewhere for a big play. LSU's given up too many big plays this year, although it's been better the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, Charles. I looked at it. So UCLA, LSU shut them out in the second half. And then I think LSU played their best game of the year against South Alabama. There's no LSU fan years from now that's going to be saying, remember we beat South Alabama? That's not it's not going to be up there with Florida in 1997, right? Or Florida in 2007, or the great games, beating South Alabama. But they've played some good defense from the second half of the UCLA game through South Alabama. Interesting, though, you look up UCLA, which I just did a while ago. They're 1-4, and I think they scored 11 points and 10 points the last couple of games. They've got a pop gun offense. South Alabama, who scored 87 against Northwestern State, 48 at Appalachian State. I looked it up. They lost last week at Arkansas State, 18-16, so their offense is kind of petered out a little bit. So there is kind of this case, even after 5 games, do we know how good LSU's defense is? Are they about to be exposed, or are they going to rise to the occasion?
You talked about the wins. Let me talk about the loss, because one of the things I think is cool about this game is if this were last year, a second loss knocks you out pretty much everything. This year it doesn't, with the playoff. So I think that the one-loss teams, for me, it's explain your loss. What happened? For Ole Miss, they would tell you that they had some really untimely penalties in the first half that extended some Kentucky's drive, and they gave up one big play at the end, and they allowed Kentucky to control the ball. For other teams, there's a lot of one-loss teams out there. For LSU, it's explain your loss. Explain your loss, and it's a lot harder to explain your loss for LSU today than it was a month ago. Mm-hmm. A month ago, we thought USC was pretty good. We thought they had an elite quarterback, and they had some playmakers, and at least one defensive lineman that was going to be a high pick in the NFL draft. Well, a month later, that loss looks a lot worse. They have not played well. They've lost 2 games. The NFL defensive lineman transferred out, decided to redshirt, and the quarterback has looked very pedestrian. So I don't put a whole lot into the Nichols game, the South Alabama game, even the UCLA game, because they're down this year. But that USC loss is difficult to explain right now.
Yeah. Well, if you're LSU, you just say, well, we always start slow. We always lose our season opener. What would you expect? Right. We get better as we go, right? Yeah. And still, I'm looking at that event real quick, and I know that's been a topic over the years. I mean, I know it was awesome to go to Vegas and go play in this stadium and stuff, but still, when I'm going through video of LSU games and I see one of these neutral site games, it still kind of feels weird after all these years to not be playing in a college stadium. And it was a little hot in Vegas. I mean, you guys were having the time of your life over there at Stadium Swim, which I was outside for a little bit too. I guess your powers are weak, old man.
We gave you some shade, right? We did. We gave you a place to stay.
You did. You treated me as well as you could have. But even in the cabanas there, it was a little steamy there in Las Vegas. 105 degrees. I think we were doing our live shot out there. But anyway, so that loss to USC doesn't look so great. And moving forward, LSU, I mean, golly, you playing Ole Miss at home. Arkansas, that's been a field goal game every time you've played them since 2019. Texas A&M, we saw what they just did to Missouri. That game's on the road. College Station, LSU hasn't won there, I think, since Thanksgiving of 2016, when Tom Herman was rumored to be the head coach and Ed Ogeron got the job a couple days later. And I think not since Matt Mauck and company, when he broke his foot and they were winning big in 2002. That was the last time LSU went to the Swamp, and it was easy or decisive.
Yeah.
So,
I said this before the Vanderbilt-Alabama game. I don't think that there's a sure win or a sure loss left on LSU's schedule.
Yeah.
I think that every one of these games could go either way. There's not the normal non-conference layup that they have in November. That's not on this year's schedule.
Right.
And everybody in the conference you're capable of beating. There's not this dominant team. I mean, if there was a trip to Austin on the schedule, or a trip to
Georgia,
Athens on the schedule, I might feel differently. But there's nobody that you can't beat. And by the same token, Vanderbilt just beat Alabama. They're certainly capable of coming. I don't think they will win in Baton Rouge, but it doesn't mean they can't win in Baton Rouge. So I think you've got 7 games left that could go either way, and it's fun for the fans. I think it's fun for the fans. I don't enjoy the routes. Those get monotonous. So I think it shapes up for a real exciting, last 2 months of the football season.
Well, I know that Charles Hanagriff won't be shedding a tear when LSU doesn't play Nobody U in November, right? That week of games every year that rolls around, where Alabama's playing the Citadel, and all these SEC teams playing either a SWAC team or somebody like that late in the year, like you've said in the past. First game of the year, everyone's excited no matter who they're playing, but then later in the year, when you've seen the good stuff, you don't want to go back to the bad stuff. So
I think that the scheduling is evolving, and the House case that came down, where they're talking about revenue sharing next year, I think it's going to crystallize it even more. I think you're going to see, if the playoff works the way it's intended to work, this meeting that the SEC and the Big Ten are having, which could, really make some differences in how the future schedules will go out. I think you're going to see, I hope, that you're going to see fewer and fewer of these mismatch games, these bye games, and you see more competition. You see more of these non-conference games that, frankly, they're really exciting. Now, look, if I'm Penn State, I'm not delighted that I've got to cross the country.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty, that's a fun game, to watch a Penn State play a USC or an Ohio State play an Oregon. I would have liked to see them as non-conference games, but better scheduling, better games, better for the fans, I think better for the game.
Well, and at this point, LSU pretty much has played everybody in the state. I think they've kind of scratched everyone's back, so to speak. They've played Grambling, they've played Southern. I think Nichols this year, that was the first time those teams met before. So, I think Nichols got paid around $1 million to just drive an hour and a half from Thibodaux and go back home. And I think it's good to help the in-state teams here and there when you can like that. But yeah, I
don't think the games go away completely, but I think that I'm hoping there'll be fewer of them.
Yeah. LSU offensively, Garrett Nussmeier has done a very nice job. I think he's averaging 330 yards per game passing. He's hitting almost 70% of his throws. He had a couple of interceptions the last game that might have been a case of just kind of getting some stuff out of his system. I listened to your post-game show. LSU was never going to lose that game. No. So it's kind of like, what the heck? Let me throw this one. And Brian Kelly on the sideline maybe told him in so many words, don't do that against Alabama, Ole Miss, and the teams we got coming up, or it could cost us.
I think Nussmeier's having a fantastic year. I think he's evolved as a quarterback. I think he's making far fewer of those bad decisions and way more good decisions. And it's different than what maybe we thought in the preseason as far as the balance between the run and the pass. I thought that they might be more of a power running team that really hasn't to this point developed, although Caden Durham's emergence is certainly encouraging. But this is Nussmeier's team, and he's capable of going out there and putting up a monster game and getting into, I don't want to say a shootout, but getting into a game where he can kind of put them on his shoulders and score 40 points, and they can win a game. Diego Pavia, kind of put Vanderbilt on his back the other night. They scored 40 points against Alabama. I think Nussmeier, they're a different type of quarterbacks. I'm not comparing them stylistically, but I think Nussmeier is certainly capable of that kind of game on this kind of stage. I don't think the stage is too big for him against an Ole Miss or an Alabama or whoever's left on the schedule. I think that's his maturity as a quarterback.
I would say from the time that Matt Flynn hoisted the crystal ball and LSU beat Ohio State in the national championship till Joe Burrow arrived, LSU football won games for other reasons than their quarterback. We've got a great defense. We've got Tyrann Mathieu knocking the ball out and returning punts for touchdowns. We've got Leonard Fournette in the backfield. Quarterback never was at the top of the list. Now you've got 2 Heisman Trophy winners in 5 years. Garrett Nussmeier doesn't need to win the Heisman or even be a finalist, but I think he's 7th in the country or something like that in yards right now. He's the next in line to thrive at a position that oftentimes LSU has viewed a quarterback graveyard for a long time. They've changed the national opinion of that position.
I'm going to disagree with you a little bit. Okay. I don't think they were a quarterback graveyard. I think they were an offensive philosophy
coaching
graveyard.
Yeah.
Jamarcus Russell was the number 1 pick in the draft. Matt Flynn spent 10 years in the NFL. Zach Mettenberger was a very talented quarterback that if, the circumstances had been a little bit different, things might have gone, I think, differently for him. So I don't quarterback graveyard, no. Offensive system graveyard.
Yeah.
I mean, think about some of the players that have come through here, the receivers and the quarterbacks. Under a little bit different offensive philosophies, I think those numbers might have been a little bit different. I think the perception might be a little bit different.
Well, I remember listening to your post-game show one time where you said something like, they're asking him to do too much. It's almost like they're asking him to stand on one leg, dance around, and then throw a pass backwards, because Cam Cameron, from what I would hear, the stuff was way too complicated, way too much stuff to learn. And look, Brandon Harris had his faults and had some things he could have done differently, but I think he is a prime example of, with maybe a little bit better coaching or maybe a better scheme, like you said, he could have been better than what he was. Or some of the other guys that came in. Danny Etling was a solid quarterback. He's twice the human being I'll ever be. He's the kind of guy that, you want your daughter to marry one day, but, they just weren't. When they played Alabama, their quarterback couldn't get the job done.
2008 changed Les Miles. You go back and we watched the 2007 National Championship highlights the other day because we were looking at some of the things they did with the tight end, because Richard Dixon does a podcast with me, and we were looking at some of the things they did with him that year. And then in 2008, it was the year of the pick six. And Les changed his philosophy from that point forward. And from that point forward, it didn't really matter who the quarterback was or who the OC was or who they were playing or what they were doing. Les was going to run the football. He was going to play defense. They were going to play really good special teams, and they absolutely were not going to lose the game offensively. And with the exception of maybe the 2013 season, where they had so much talent that offensively that he couldn't kind of rein it in, they played very, very conservative football the rest of the way. And the 2008 season was a season that might have gone a little bit differently if they just hadn't turned the ball over so many times.
Yeah.
And I'm convinced that changed Les Miles' thinking about how to approach game plans, because it's hard to remember, but when Les first got here in 2005 and Jimbo was calling the plays, I mean, you had a first-round quarterback, 2 first-round receivers. Dixon ended up being the leading receiving tight end in LSU history until, Taylor just passed him up.
Yeah.
But in 08, it all changed, and it stayed that way through the rest of Les's tenure.
That was a funny story Richard Dixon told you on the postgame the other day. He caught 2 touchdowns against Ohio State in the national championship game wearing 82. His hometown back in Mississippi bought a bunch of 82 jerseys for him to autograph and then give away, and then he gets number 18.
Yeah.
What are we going to do with all these 82s?
I thought he was going to have to go buy a whole bunch of jerseys himself. Yeah.
That's good stuff. I mean, that goes back, and I visited with Ryan Perilou many times, and, still kind of tried to understand how could you be handed the keys to a Ferrari and then throw them in the river like you did. You're about to be the starting quarterback of the defending national champions, be throwing the ball to Demetrius Byrd and Brandon LaFell and Richard Dixon and handing the ball off to Charles Scott and everything. But, that's always been a big topic. Les Miles and his PTSD from 2008. Caden Durham. He was like fourth on our minds, at least, going into the year. Caleb Jackson, they tweeted out a video of him running over guys at practice, and we all got excited. And look at Caleb Jackson. He weighs 235 pounds, and he's going to do this and that. He's still a young player, got his whole career in front of him. But with the injury to John Emery, who was having a storybook start with the way he was playing against USC, Caden Durham has proven he's the most explosive player out of the backfield.
There's the speed and explosiveness doesn't surprise me. He was an elite track athlete in addition to being a terrific high school football player. What surprised me about him is the power that he's run with and his ability to take the ball out of the backfield and catch the football. I didn't know that about him. Ordinarily, you get a guy, and I'm not labeling him a track guy because he was a great football player in high school. But usually, the guys that have elite track speed don't have elite power. In fact, most of the time they play receiver instead of running back.
Yeah.
So his ability to break tackles, to be elusive, all of those things with the speed has been a revelation. And then he can catch the football too. That is another thing where you get sometimes you get guys, he's got great speed. There have been some guys come through here with great speed, didn't necessarily have the best hands. His hands look good to me so far. So those two things, along with his vision and the great speed, the explosiveness, I think he's got a chance to be a special player here.
I'm just going back in the time machine. Slip Watkins, late 80s, track guy.
Slip Watkins.
Benny Brazil. Benny caught you share of passes. I'm not leaving out you.
Xavier Carter was an Olympic track guy. Trenton Holiday was about as fast a guy as could come through here, and it was a while before they trusted him completely. Now, at the end of his career here, he was a little bit more sure-handed, but at the beginning he had some ball security problems. So the fact that he's able to secure the ball, at least so far, is good to see.
One of the great Nick Saban stories, Benny Brazil, Nick Saban's on his butt the whole summer because he's going to run in the Olympics. This is not like he's like going to work a summer job at a camp or something. He's in the Olympics in Athens, Greece, and he's blowing up his phone every day, calling Dennis Shaver. When's Benny coming back? When's Benny coming back? And he said, I just ran and I finished fourth in the world or whatever. And Saban was watching it on TV or something and immediately called Shaver. When's he coming back? Just that's the way he was.
That's why he was successful as he was. It was probably a pain for the kids that played for him because he was so he was never going to let up. At the end of the national championship game, he was just mad because he wasn't already out recruiting. Right.
He yelled at Sam Nader in the locker room for what I heard, that they were behind on their recruiting schedule. They just hoisted the crystal ball 10 minutes ago.
He never stopped. And you and I were on the beat when he was here. We saw
I was just getting beat. I wasn't on the beat. Saban was just...
I covered probably every press briefing and press conference that Nick Saban ever did here, with the exception of maybe a handful on the road that I didn't do. I was with the guy every day for 5 years, and he almost never let up. Every now and then, I can count him on one hand the number of times he kind of got off topic, if you will. I remember I asked him a question about Maurice Clarett, was a running back at Ohio State that was challenging the NFL system about how long you had to be out of high school before you go to the draft. And I asked him if he thought that any high school kid was ready to go straight to the NFL. And he told this great story about when he was in Cleveland and how the ownership had affected their free agent signings, and expectations of the owner was what would scare guys off of all this stuff. And it was a great story, but he almost never did that. And now it's great to watch him on game day and doing some of the other things he's doing, because now he's telling some of those stories and he's relaxed. And the guy's so incredibly bright and just this wealth of information. But you almost never got to see that when he was coaching.
You would hear it from other people, like players and other people that knew him, that they would tell us, he's not always like that. He's not the screaming. He has a charming side. He's got a funny side. He's not the sometimes labeled jerk, at the podium and on the sideline and all that. And I don't want to make any sort of sweeping comments about Kalen DeBoer because Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, because we saw in Saban's last year. Kim Mulkey, one of the greatest to ever do it, told me that was probably Nick Saban's best coaching job, because he got a team that was ordinary at times, one play away from the national championship game and SEC champs. So they were kind of heading in this direction. Now, that guy, number 13 for Alabama, who threw the fit at the end of the game, I could almost envision Saban running onto the field in action and grabbing him by the shoulder pad and yanking him off the field.
Not me. You know why? He never would have done that if Saban was a coach. I'm sorry.
Yeah, it would never got to that.
He would have never done that. I think Kalen DeBoer is a good coach. I really do. But you're not really the coach at Alabama until you lose a game that you're not supposed to lose, and you have to deal with the wrath of that fan base and the expectations that go there. And following a legend like that, and I was on the LSU broadcast team when Smoke Laval was a coach here, and following Skip was a tough thing.
Yes,
and Smoke was a terrific baseball guy.
Yeah,
okay, he knew the game in and out. He could manage the game and all that, but he wasn't Skip. And once you get the expectation of that and you've seen that, it's tough to follow it.
Smoke was a lot smarter than a lot of people labeled him. A lot of people labeled him kind of this bumbling guy. And
that wasn't true. That wasn't true at all. I spent a lot of time with Smoke, and Smoke's baseball acumen was excellent. But Skip was an all-timer.
Yes.
Nobody could be expected to emulate that, follow that. It's just impossible.
I remember when they let Smoke go, I remember an LSU fan telling me that Smoke's going to learn that we're not going to put up, that we demand a winning coach. And I'm like, well, what's your definition of winning? Because at the time, I think he was the winningest coach over his span. He won almost 70% of his games.
Smoke Laval finished, his SEC record was tops. It was tied with Ray Tanner, who would go on to win 2 national championships at South Carolina for the 5 years he was here. But I say this all the time. You ask any LSU fans' recollection of what Smoke Laval's record was, they'll tell you it was 0-4.
Yep.
Because he played 4 games in Omaha and lost all 4 of them. And that's not fair, but that's reality.
Yeah. Well, and then Alabama did this the first time around with the you had Curry, who was the guy? Ray Perkins before him.
Oh yeah, Ray Perkins, and then Bill Curry.
Yeah.
And then Gene Stallings won a national championship there. He didn't leave because he was losing. He left because there was the recruiting improprieties at Alabama. Imagine that. And then of course they went through Mike DuBose, and I'll give you another. Dennis Francione was
left
winning there, left because he didn't like coaching in that fishbowl. And then they had Mike Price for about 5 minutes, and then Mike Shula, and it's a tough job. It's a tough job.
When you go to work every day and there's
you walk by the statues?
Yeah, 10 statues. Well, I don't know how many statues they got out there, but it's a lot of guys who've won national championships. And like you said, you lose to a team that you hadn't lost to in 40 years. When you've got 80% of the stadium is your fans.
Yeah.
I mentioned it. I was at the Artist, formerly known as USL, in 1996. Texas A&M came to Cajun Field. I remember tailgating with my Sigma Nu brothers, and back then, a lot of times the people tailgating never made it into the stadium. They just want to drink. They didn't care about the team. The team wasn't good. Blah blah blah. I said, guys, this is never going to happen again. We got to go inside. And so. It was one of those deals where I think of the Cajuns' 4 touchdowns, 3 were defensive. They were returns of some kind. Fumble return, pick 6. I think Jake Delhomme and company, I think they only scored 1 offensive touchdown. And I think
was Brian Mitchell on that team? Or
no.
That was the game they played against Alabama, right? When Brian Mitchell was the quarterback?
I don't think that was 1991. I think he was gone by then. I think it was Hayes, the guy that played at Parkview Baptist.
You could tell me better. I'm trying to remember.
I was at that game, too. For those who don't, Alabama came to Cajun Field in Lafayette. I think it was 1991, and they won 25-6, I think. Gary Hollingsworth, who was looked like this pencil right here, this pen. Real skinny guy. They only scored 1 touchdown. I kicked a bunch of field goals, won 25-6. But I think it was one of those 5-for-1s. Like the Cajuns went over there 5 times, and they got them to come back once.
It was, if I'm not mistaken, it was a series that was scheduled by Bear Bryant, who, of course, had passed away years before.
Yeah.
But the contracts went out that far in the future back then. And you're right, it was a 3 or 4 or 5 for 1, whatever it was. And Bryant would do that. He would come to your place and, sell it out and all that stuff, but you had to go back there the other few times. And I remember that game, and I do remember the A&M game. I remember the goalposts went right out of Cajun Field, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, for those who don't know, Cajun Field and all of their athletic Cajun Dome, the baseball Teague Moore, they're not on campus. So, like, when you go into class, you're not walking by the stadium every day like the LSU students do. So it's a ways away. So I think from what I heard, the goalpost got broken into parts. Like, one went to Ray's Sports Bar, and one went all the way to the Strip, which is not close.
Well, it was closer than the Vermilion River. I mean, you couldn't throw it in there. Like, Vanderbilt went 3.5 miles to throw it in the river on Saturday.
So it kind of reminded me of that because Cajun Field at the time, I think that was the largest crowd ever. I think it was 38,000 or something, about the same size as Vanderbilt, and shocking upset, and they carried the goalpost out. But yeah, I mean, so that's not a good. I mean, wow, he has learned about DeBoer has learned about the Alabama fan base in just 2 weeks' time, right? You beat the number 1 team in the country. Everyone loves you. Next week, you lose to who's been the bad news bears of the league for all these years, and they're all after you for everything. For you wore a T-shirt instead of wearing a shirt with a collar. I mean, when you lose, you're under the microscope for everything.
Do you ever ride the Texas Cyclone when it was
Astroworld?
Yeah, it was like at one time I think it was the biggest roller coaster in the country, or whatever. They could always tell you about riding a Texas Cyclone, but until you actually did it, you couldn't really appreciate it. Well, I think that's what I know. Kalen DeBoer is a bright guy. He's a really good coach. But until you live it, I don't think you can fully appreciate what it's like to coach there.
I mean, we would talk about it in the car, like going to road trips and coming back. That would always kind of, who do you think is going to replace Nick Saban at Alabama? Who would want that job? Who is stupid enough to follow Nick Saban at Alabama, or confident enough to have to? And somebody brought up an interesting point today at the gym to me, who's a football guy and used to coach football. He comes from a part of the country, that Pacific Northwest. It's a lot different than the South in terms of kind of treating the players with kid gloves and, the thing, don't throw anybody under the bus. Like, he got asked about that number 13, and he did like a 2.5-minute word salad about he's a great kid and he does all this and that, and just go straight to the point. He shouldn't have done it. We handled it in-house, and that's it.
I kind of bristled at the idea that when Brian Kelly came here, well, he's from somewhere else, he won't be a fit, and I didn't think that was fair because if you look back over the history of LSU, the very best coaches, Skip Bertman's not from here, Dale Brown wasn't from here, Bill Lawrence-Parker wasn't from here, Nick Saban wasn't from here, and so on. Sue Gunner wasn't from here. The adjustment period, though, there is an adjustment.
Yeah.
How fast you make it. The idea that it just can't work. No, it can work, but you have to adjust. And I suspect that Kalen DeBoer will adjust, but he'll adjust and he'll win, and it'll be like smoke. Okay, 5 years from now he'll say, you know what, I've got the best record in the SEC other than maybe 1 or 2 teams, and they'll say, you're not Saban. And then how do you adjust to that? And I'm completely serious when, again, Laval went to the College World Series 2 of the first 3 years. They won the Southeastern Conference. They had a great record, and they lost, games in Omaha. And in just what you said, we're not going to put up with losing here. He's not really losing. He's just not winning at Skip's level. And I think that's what DeBoer will have to make that adjustment when they'll say, hey, you're doing fine, but you ain't Saban.
Well, and it's harder for me, Charles, to judge coaches these days. Used to be I'd have a good feeling of this guy's the best coach and he's utilizing or he's elevating. Now when it's buying players, I'm not even sure how to judge the coaches now to an extent. And, talking about what you just said, too, it's funny because a lot of people said Coach O was a perfect fit for LSU because he was Cajun. He was from Louisiana. You and I are both from the Lafayette area. Lafayette is Cajun country. Baton Rouge ain't Cajun, right? I mean, you go 30 minutes this way, an hour that way, you'll hit it. But Baton Rouge, man, they don't talk like that. And, you don't have the Ma and Pa Cajun stores and all that. It's wonderful. It's great. But it ain't what Coach O is. So I talked to somebody about this. Really, anybody from outside Baton Rouge is not a fit.
if I-10, okay, if you start in Lafayette and you go 50 miles east to Baton Rouge, and then you go another 50 to 70 miles east to New Orleans, these are three very distinctly different different cultures for sure. Again, it's how fast you make. But to get back on your point about how do you judge coaches, I think it's harder now.
Yeah.
And you say, well, it's easy. You just get a big checkbook and you just go get a bunch of guys. But you have to gel these players so much more quickly. I would say when let's just go back to Les, because that was the last coach before the transfer portal opened. Okay, the transfer portal opened during Ed's tenure. Les would bring back, and everybody was, I would say, about 70% of his roster every year, 65 to 70% of his roster. All of those guys knew your system. All of those guys knew your routines, your habits, your culture. Okay. Now you're turning over at least 50% of your roster every year. I think that the coaching job is so much more difficult there. Even if you bring in great talent and you have them, cultivated in what you want, they have to mesh. We got a great matchup this weekend with Oregon and Ohio State, right? These are two top 5 teams. These are two undefeated teams with playoff aspirations, national championship aspirations. Both of them with transfer quarterbacks. Now, imagine that. You're going into a season where you got national championship aspirations with a transfer quarterback. And for one of them, he's been at 2 different places. They've had some success, but they've also had, an acclimation period where that it's not the easiest thing. You say, well, you just, keep your guys. Stay out of the transfer portal. Just keep all your guys. Well, it might work, but you know who the most experienced team in the top 25 was at the beginning of the year? I'm fairly certain without looking, it was Oklahoma State. They had the best retention of anybody. Yeah. And now they've lost 3 straight. So you got coaching. There's no set. There's no set template. Well, this will definitely work. No, you gotta cultivate a culture that gets to every kid. And I think this is one of the things, even if he won't say it publicly, that convinced Nick Saban it was time to hang up his headsets, was I got to recruit every kid on my roster every day. Every day. One of all of the things, the NIL doesn't bother me to the point where, I hate this for college football. Okay, the players get paid. That's fine. I don't mind revenue sharing. I can even deal with the transfer portal. You know what I hate most about modern college football? This new trend that we're seeing this year of a guy who plays 4 games and then quits. Yes. I hate it. If you go through the off season and you go through the summer workouts with your guys, and you go through August and you go through all that, and you don't get off to a good start, and you say, "Man, I'm out of here," I'm sorry. I can't wrap my head around that. That to me doesn't teach anything that is positive about the game.
In any other aspect of real life, that will not work. No. You will lose your job or whatever.
You leave in the off season, that's one thing, okay? Yeah. The coaches change, the philosophy changes, you change, whatever. But once you get in, once you put your feet in the water with that team, and you've gone through all that stuff, and you quit on and you bail on them in the middle of September, I'm sorry, I completely disagree with that.
Yeah, well, we're going to sound like old guys or whatever, but
we are old guys.
Are we? Okay, damn, the truth is so hard to take sometimes.
Older guys, maybe
older
not
guys.
Old guys.
Yeah,
older
right,
guys.
right. It makes you feel better. Like you look at Archie Bunker. He was like in his 40s on that show. He looked like he was like 60 or something, 70. I think Red Fox on Sanford and Son, he was like only 53. He looked a lot older. So we're very young men here. But I can just imagine the stories that I've heard for guys that played for Jerry Stovall, Bill Arnsparger. Hey, Coach, I'm not playing in the bowl game. You're what? Coach, I'm not playing anymore this year. You're what? So, yeah.
And I'm going to go play for your competition. Yeah. I'm going to go somewhere else.
These things really do just kind of attack the concept of team. We're all in it together. No one person is more important than the other and everything. But that's tough. And as I'm doing this Ole Miss scouting report a little bit, just looking up, the storyline of somebody going up against their old team was I don't want to say it never happened, but it just wasn't a deal. But now you take a look at Trey Amos, a senior from Catholic High of New Iberia. He played at Alabama. And then you got J.J. Pegues, the fridge. That guy's been scoring from the 1 yard line. He's 325 pounds, defensive lineman. He played 24 games at Auburn. So you've got all these guys that have played somewhere else. And you've got guys at senior day that are running out where the fans are supposed to, feel a tug at their heart. But I've only known this guy for 6 months. It's not your Tommy Hotson, Wendell Davis, Ricky Blanton, the guys we grew up on.
The next time Ole Miss comes to Baton Rouge, Walker Howard may very well be the quarterback.
Yeah, that's another storyline. He's third string right now, I guess. Something like that. I saw he's only thrown a couple of passes. Hope he does well there. Know Jamie very well.
We both do, and I hope the best for you. But he may be the quarterback against LSU the next time Ole Miss comes here.
Well, and let you go here in a second. I appreciate your time. One aspect of this game that I want to talk about real quick. So Trey Harris is the leading receiver in the country right now with 885 yards. Last week he was the number one receiver. You know who was number 2 last week in the country in receiving yards last week?
I don't.
Jack Besh, TCU.
Yeah.
Now, LSU fans, he's not playing against SEC competition. Okay, I know. But, and I did an interview with Jack last week. I thought it's a good positive story to do on a bye week. Some people are just, I don't want to call it simple-minded, but it's just like, he left us, he's a traitor, blah, blah, blah. It's like, he's at TCU. He's not hurting LSU. He's far away, and he's doing well. Why can't you just say, I'm happy for him, But those two guys, both from the Acadiana area, and apparently Trey Harris was the quarterback at Como and threw passes to Malik Neighbors on the same team there.
Okay.
And so from Trey Harris's perspective, or the people that know him, he played 3 years at Louisiana Tech. He entered the transfer portal, and apparently a lot of teams got on him immediately, and one of those was not Louisiana State University. So, and Joe Sloan was a coach at Louisiana Tech, and they felt like, well, he should know Trey Harris, but they got in the game late from what I'm told. That's one side of the story, and Trey Harris went to Ole Miss. Now, he's got an injury, but a full Tiger Stadium against LSU, and I'm an hour down the road. He's going to have to be pretty hobbled to not play in this game, I would think.
These are the games that you go to these schools for. Like you said, nobody's going to remember the South Alabama game. You'll remember this one for sure. So, yeah, if he's out, he's really out. It's not a game-time decision other than we're going to actually see if you can run. We're not playing any games with that.
He caught the game-winning touchdown against LSU last year when LSU scored 49 points in Oxford and still lost the game. All right, well, before I let you go, Saints, I never thought they were going to win that game last night against Kansas City. It's kind of like I failed my English test, I failed my civics test, and now I've got an ace, my advanced chemistry test. Yeah. When you blow a game against the Eagles at home and you really gift wrap the game to the Falcons, to try to bounce back at Arrowhead Stadium is not ideal, and they just never were. They cut the game to 2 points early in the fourth quarter on Foster Morrow's touchdown, but they missed the extra point, and Kansas City was kind of playing with their food.
I don't know I do know what to make of the Saints. They're too good to be bad and too bad to be good. They're just sort of in the middle. They're a mile wide and an inch deep. If everybody, and what I mean by that is if everybody is healthy and everybody is, on the same deal, then they're good enough to beat a lot of teams, but they're not good enough to beat the really good teams, and if you had this plethora of injuries on the interior of the offensive line, and then last night at linebacker, and you don't have a very deep receiving room or wide receiver room. It's tough. It's tough. And if the quarterback's down for any amount of time, then that's going to make it tough too, because you've got no experience behind him. But there's too many guys there for them to just say, well, they're going to go 3 and 14. They're better than that. And that's kind of the last place you want to be if you're a fan. If you're winning, okay, great. Obviously, that's what you want. But if you're losing, you say, well, you know what? We'll reboot and we'll kind of work through this. They're just sort of in that middle. And if you're in the middle for a year, okay, 2 years, it feels like they've been in the middle since Drew Brees left.
Yeah, as Mike Scarborough would say, it's almost like like in college football, the version of that is 8-4 almost. You know, you're kind of, we won twice as many as we lost, but we're not competing for anything significant. We're winning the rent of wins, and it doesn't move the needle with your customers. And
your record, if you're 8-4 in the SEC, is not really 8-4. Because I'm not Ronnie Rance. I don't do a good skip, but see, we buy you 3. Okay, so really your record's 5-4, and that's true. And that's really true.
Skip said when he first got to LSU, he was talking about the baseball program, they were the best of the worst, or they were the worst of the best, just mediocre, How long have you been in broadcasting?
I got my first radio job in 1987.
So do you remember the first time your voice hit the radio, like live radio, that you were on the air?
Yeah, I did a weather report. 72 and sunny. No, I did. I started working at a broadcast radio station in high school because when I went into audition, you had to audition, I could read 7 minutes of news, weather, and sports without stumbling all over myself, and also because I would work for minimum wage. And the first thing I ever did was about a 30-second weather on KFMV Franklin.
There you go, Franklin, Louisiana. What's the casino down the road? Cypress Bayou?
Cypress Bayou, yeah.
Cypress Bayou.
That wasn't there in 1987.
That wasn't there, no. Hanson Memorial was,
yeah,
where you graduated in 1989.
Yeah.
Franklin High School, those are the two. You got your private school, your public school.
West St. Mary's down there now. That school wasn't open when I was there.
Harry Coleman.
Harry Coleman went to West St. Mary,
big in the national championship game in 2007 against Ohio State. And then when were you doing sports?
I did some sports at that radio station in Franklin. They let me. That's where I learned how to write. They had a news director, and he let me write. I covered parish council meetings and city council meetings, school board meetings, and then the trade-off was they let me cover sports. So outside of football season, I would go cover basketball games and write up stories about that, local high schools and stuff like that. So I started writing a little sports. I didn't do play-by-play until I got to Baton Rouge.
So what was it 1300 The Animal? What was the name of that station?
It was WIBR. We were Sports Animal for a while. We were all sports all the time, and I got in 93 with a guy named Bruce Hunter. Hired me.
He owned Tiger Rag too, right? Or did he? He was a writer there.
No, Bruce was at The Advocate.
That's right. He was a sports writer at The Advocate.
Yeah, he was on the LSU baseball beat. If you have the LSU baseball posters, okay, the first one with Rick Green on the thing, the column on the side was Bruce's column about the national championship game.
That's right.
That's the first guy I worked for.
Gotcha.
And Lieber Keane was with him, and that's where I got my start in Baton Rouge.
I guess this stuff on you is more at the top of the show than the end of the show, but how the fan experience and everything and your importance, or how they listen to you and whatnot. I mean, I remember going to Tiger Stadium as a kid, and you didn't know what was going on the other games that were being played at that time. You didn't have a cell phone to look and check scores. You were relying on Dan Bornay to announce the scores, or I think they might have flashed them on the video board at the time. Some.
Yeah.
And so now I still catch your post-game show. There's a guy from Abbeville that calls in a lot, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Jules. Yeah.
Yeah. So how has that changed over the years? Is it still the same, or
no? It's nothing. It's nothing close to the same. We started doing post game in the late '90s. I started doing post game in the late '90s. First of all, you had to make sure you could see the game, because not every game was on TV. Yeah. So you had to figure out a way that you could see the game. I started assisting on the post-game shows in '94. One of the first ones, I wasn't even lead anchor. I was just kind of the side guy, running stats and scores and stuff like that. Was the interception game at Auburn, which back then the biggest difference was no internet, no social media, no no way to express your
Yeah.
frustration with the game except to call a post game.
It was all concentrated into this.
Yeah, and so now we still get plenty of callers and stuff like that. But now if you are angry about a play or angry about a play call or whatever, you just you're hopping on social media and you're expressing yourself. So that's probably the biggest difference from when I started doing this to now.
I interviewed Richard Condon and Jamie Howard. They're friends today. Back then, they had a kind of a public. The urban legend was Jamie showed up at the station and wanted to fight him. I think Jamie denied that, or maybe he called in and told Richard something. I don't know.
I do remember the spray painted car that had nothing to do with either one of them. It was just somebody else, kill Howard or whatever it was that they had spray paint on the side of some old junker car, and that was a rough time. And I know Jamie very well. And that was unfortunate.
The adults,
the circumstances that he was put in at that time, and I'll tell you, I did get to cover the first full year I had a show by myself was DiNardo's first year. That was a really lucky break for me because I took my own show right as Curly Hallman was fired. And again, no social media, no internet message boards, nothing like that. If you wanted to talk about who the next coach at LSU was going to be, you had to call a radio station. We were the only guys going. So it didn't even matter who I was. They just wanted to call and talk to somebody about who the next coach was going to be. And that's where I kind of got a foothold in. The people knew I was there because they wanted to know who the next LSU football coach was going to be. Well, we got in on the ground floor with Jerry DiNardo, and back then covering the team was way different than it is now. It was a lot more intimate. You had a lot more one-on-ones. And so I got to see Jamie's kind of redemption, the next year when DiNardo was there and they beat Auburn and carried him off the field. And that was pretty cool.
Yeah. People maybe today that are newer fans can't appreciate. Oh, they went 7-4-1. What's the big deal about that? But it was a lot of fun after you've had 6 straight losing seasons to be relevant again.
My first year on the air was 1993 here, and the last game of the season was against Arkansas. It was in Tiger Stadium, and LSU had gone 4 straight years without a winning record, which was the longest that they'd ever been. And they were playing Arkansas, and if they won the game, they were going to have a 6-5 record, and they're going to go to the CarQuest Bowl.
I remember.
Okay, so they handed out. This is when the bowl people would come in. They handed out these keychains, okay, and they had the little CarQuest thing on it, and they were shaking the keychains, and it was supposed to be kind of like a throwback to when they threw all the oranges on the field in '82 to the Orange Bowl. So they got all these keychains, okay, and I mean, place packed. I mean, it's electric. LSU's finally going to go back to the bowl, and there's going to be 100,000 keychains on the field. And Arkansas came in and ran for about 350 yards and just blew LSU right out of the stadium. And the parking lot was just littered with these keychains that people had thrown away on their way, back to their cars. But that would have been a big deal. 6-5 would have been a big deal. When they went to the Independence Bowl 2 years later, it was a big deal.
Yes.
Place was sold
it out,
and they played against a coach. I forgot what happened to him, the guy at Michigan State.
Yeah, the glasses.
I forgot where he ended up. But it was a big deal back then. Now it's way different.
Eddie Kinnison, my great neighbor, had a huge game in that Independence Bowl against Michigan State, and I think DiNardo told me that he knew Eddie Kinnison was going pro when he ran a long punt back for a touchdown. Then he leaped over the fence, he said when he soared over the fence, he could see he was leaving LSU. It's funny, Eddie Kinnison, love you, brother, might be one of the few people on earth who loves Curly Hallman and does not like DiNardo. He and DiNardo never spoke. They didn't get along.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
And I've met Eddie a few times. One of the craziest plays in LSU history, a 100-yard punt return. But when he returned that kickoff in the Independence Bowl, it was either right before or right after Michigan State had run one back. It was back-to-back kickoff returns. I think it was Mashin Muhammad for Michigan State. I might be wrong on that. It was back-to-back kickoff returns.
Tony Banks was the quarterback from Michigan
Tony Banks was a quarterback. Andre Rison was on that team, maybe. No, that might have been after. Andre Rison. Mashin Muhammad, I think, was definitely on that team.
Yeah. Well, one quick thing, you taking those phone calls, who's going to be the next head coach, reminds me of Fletcher Mackel, Fletcher. So he was working in Alexandria at KALB. And they've got, I think it was Game 5, Game 6 of the NBA Finals on. It's when Larry Johnson hit the three-pointer and got fouled. Is that him? That happened that day, and the game goes in overtime. Well, they had a Miracle Network telethon that was scheduled to start at 6 p.m. on the dot. This game goes to overtime. Oh, no. They flip over to this telethon, and Fletcher's in the news. Dude, it's like the phones were broke. I'd hang one up. I'd pick it up. It'd be ringing. Like the second I put it down, it's just like the whole newsroom's blowing up with
the
phone
Heidi
calls.
game all over again.
Yeah,
right?
and look, way before I got at Channel 9, they used to have the JP game at 11. And it would never finish in time for the 2:30 CBS game. It seemed like it would always overlap or whatever. So the news director or the GM or whatever told the person in master control, the second that game hits 0, you punch out and go to CBS, meaning the JP game, Lincoln Financial, whatever. So I don't know the two teams playing, but it's the last play of the game. The quarterback drops back, and he's rolling around. He's buying time, and then the clock goes to 0. But obviously the play punches out.
Oh, no. Please don't tell me.
The Hail Mary was incomplete or didn't happen.
It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Good
thing it wasn't 2002 in LSU, Kentucky. Anyway, I appreciate your time, Charles. I could talk to you forever. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for coming down. Catch him on the pregame show, the postgame show, Jimmy Yacht during the week, and go to any of the fine restaurants that they dine at each, whether it's Los Reyes, Mike Anderson's, Walk-Ons, Doe's Eat Place.
Yeah, Doe's Eat Place. And one other thing, Richard Dixon and I told you we're doing a podcast now. We're doing some film review, and Richard's real good at showing us things. I've learned a lot doing it. So Handycast on YouTube, you can catch that once a week.
And Richard's great with you because he tells the truth. He's not afraid to hey, I'm a former player. I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or whatever. He comes out and says it. We weren't good here. We weren't good there. We're not. We got to improve this and that. I appreciate his take.
And he's a football lifer too. He grew up playing the game. His dad, his grandfather, played college football. And a lot of guys, when they get out of the game, they don't want to watch anymore. They'll watch casually. Which is great. There's another. Rich is not. He's still very into watching as much football as he can. Like Jacob Hester is and T. Bob is. Those guys, they want to still be involved watching the game because they love watching football too. So I love that about Richard. He's watching as many games as he can because he still very much loves the sport. Yeah, Kevin Falk, who's great with us, doing some stuff. A couple of times he's like, Jock, I was about to hit the road in the third quarter there, some of these blowouts, but he's nice enough to stick around and do the stuff with us. So anyway, Charles Hanagriff, one of the best ones around. I'm Jacques Doucet. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you later.